Hello, and welcome to the Community IT Innovators Technology Topics Podcast, where we discuss nonprofit technology, cybersecurity, tech project implementation, strategic planning, and nonprofit IT careers. Find us at communityit.com.
Welcome, everyone, to the Community IT Innovators Podcast. I'm Carolyn Woodard, and I am here today with my friend Pat Sprehe, who is going to tell us a little bit more about managing your subscriptions at a nonprofit. So, Pat, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Patrick Sprehe. I'm the Director of Information Systems and Technology at Community IT. And so I handle a lot of the internal IT here. So I am responsible for, among other things, managing our subscriptions and licensing.
This is one of those aspects of IT support that's really grown over the last probably even just 10 years or so, because it used to be that if you had software, you had a physical floppy disk that you put in and ran. But now we have almost everything is available as a subscription service in the cloud. So it seems like that would make things a lot more complicated.
Yes and no. In a lot of ways, it's actually made things easier. So it used to be, as you said, you had a piece of software and then you had a license key, and you would install the software wherever you needed it, and then you would use the license key to license that software, except that there was no real way to track who had the software, or once you lost track, what devices that software were on. If, for example, a user got the license key, they could just go home and install the software on their home computer, and you would have no idea. The vendors also didn't have good track of how many licenses you were using at your organization, in part because you would have to uninstall or reinstall and reapply that license key. And so there's no way for them to keep track either.
So when all of these subscriptions moved into the cloud, how did that change your ability to track who has what subscription and what you're paying for at your nonprofit?
Yeah, so in about the early 2000s, vendors started to switch to a SaaS model, so a software as a service model. And so now you're subscribing to a service, and that service is the software application that comes with it. And the big change really is that the software is being licensed to users instead of just a certain number of installs with a license key. There are a few advantages on the company side. So one is that it's very easy to track who has the software because it's assigned to users. So you just have a list of users that have the software assigned to them. There's some cost benefits, believe it or not. One is that you don't have to pay for the licenses in full upfront. You can pay a monthly fee if that's what you prefer. The software is automatically getting updated, features automatically get added. And then there's centralized management, which means that you can often use automated deployment tools to automatically deploy. And, if somebody leaves the organization, you can also remove the license from them as well.
I think also this move to, I guess, almost selling the software right to the person who's going to use it can also mean that the different tools and subscriptions that people at your organization are using, they could just sign up for it themselves. They don't always have to go through IT. Well, depending on how your IT is set up. You may have it set up so that to be able to use it, you have to let IT know. But a lot of nonprofits have it set up so that if you need a tool, like if you want to use Asana, you might just sign up for it, or your team, your department might sign up for it. So then what happens to being able to keep track of everyone and all of their subscriptions?
Yeah, it's funny that you mention Asana, because in Asana, any manager can add somebody to a team in Asana, which automatically assigns them a license. So there's not a way I can limit who has been assigned licenses in Asana, except I can basically limit the total number of licenses based on the number that I've subscribed to. Yeah, there's some other issues. So somebody can go and sign up for like a personal Microsoft account and start using that Microsoft software under their personal account, which can mean that when they try to save data to OneDrive, they're saving it to their personal OneDrive. And there also may be some cost management related to that. So maybe they're charging that personal Microsoft account to the company credit card because they just don't know that we actually have this on the company system is centralized, and we have a Microsoft tenant for this organization. So yeah, there's certainly some places where it can go wrong. But in general, people come in and to the organization, so they start working at the organization, and they get assigned the licenses that they need, and they just start using the software that they need, and it works pretty smoothly. I do think that just like any other system that people purchase and use, that you do need some procurement management. So you don't want I'm going to use Carolyn. You don't want your marketing director to go out and buy a subscription to Adobe if you already have an Adobe tenant, and you would rather just buy it as part of the operations department and assign that license to that marketing director.
I give thanks for using me as an example, but not that has ever happened. But I could see, I mean, I guess this is part of the philosophical question, right? It's why do you care? Does it matter that different departments or different individuals at your nonprofit are going out and purchasing these licenses themselves? And it sounds like to some extent you care, like for budget reasons, or because you might have an enterprise level license that they should just be using, and they might even get more features that way. But to some extent, you might want to encourage those individuals or teams to be entrepreneurial and solve their problems and find the software that's going to help them in what they need to do to be productive.
Yes, I think in a lot of ways, more than me owning the purchase and management of those licenses, I need to be aware of that. So when I'm putting together my budgeting, or when I'm setting up a user account, or when I'm offboarding a user, I need to know what needs to be assigned, what needs to be removed, for cost management, which is obviously an issue. But the other one is what I think of as IT footprint management. So, security, compliance, performance optimization, scalability, those kinds of things. I don't want like a mailbox out there that somebody's using and I don't know about. And then maybe a malicious actor gets access to that and now has control over that mailbox or has control over that product that they can use to get access to other systems. I do think, though, that I don't need to be managing every single system we have. So, for example, we have a time scheduling app called TimeZest, which our help desk uses to schedule sessions with end users that they're supporting. I'm aware of it. But I don't have any kind of management access to that. I don't need it, and so that's fully managed on the by our service desk team. But like it is a line item in my budget, so I need to make sure that I at least know that it's there, and that we are paying for it.
I think that is one thing that I've heard several stories of new clients who came to us to help them learn what licenses they had that were not being used. Maybe staff who had left, or someone purchased something, set it up as a recurring payment, and then just they weren't using it anymore, but they weren't noticing that they were still paying for it. So that is important. Do you have any best practices for nonprofits in how to track licenses and subscriptions? Does a spreadsheet work, or?
A spreadsheet can certainly work. I think one thing you want to make sure you do is you want to have one person who is aware of everything. Often that's going to be the finance controller or the CFO. Mostly you just want, hopefully you have a process for submitting expenses, and then a similar process for submitting recurring expenses. So, if you are signing up for a subscription, you would want to make sure that somebody is aware, especially at a nonprofit, like you probably want to run that by IT. It's really nice when our clients like come to us and say, hey, like, we're planning on buying some Adobe licenses, and we can say either, oh, well, you actually already have an Adobe tenant, so we can just add them to this tenant, or we can say, oh, well, actually, that organization offers a nonprofit discount. We should get the nonprofit discount. I just worked with an organization that had, for example, an Adobe tenant, but it was not a nonprofit tenant, and so some of their licenses, we were able to lower the cost of the subscription by renewing with an Adobe, or sorry, with a nonprofit tenant with Adobe. Another example is a client that where people were using Grammarly licenses, and everybody had their own Grammarly license, and that very quickly gets very hard to track. Whereas the alternative is to get Grammarly for Business, which is basically the same, but the licensing and the user management is centralized in a single platform.
Oh, that makes so much sense. I'm sure that made it so much easier for some people. And I think that's right. Like you should be able to just go to your vendor list at some point. Like you could pull that out of the finances and just see what are you paying for. You mentioned Adobe a couple of times, and I know that that's kind of a little bit of a stinker for managing. Are there other services or products that offer specific challenges to managing their licenses or have advantages if you manage them more centrally?
I think all of them have advantages if you manage them centrally. It just makes things so much easier. Adobe is interesting just because it's kind of tricky to work with Adobe support. And you have to go to it's easier to go directly to Adobe support to get like the nonprofit tenant, but it just requires some back and forth. And so it's tedious to set up. Once it's been set up, it becomes much easier to manage. But it's that initial setup that can be troublesome. There are a few vendors that have kind of weird licensing. So I know like Asana, like you have to increase and decrease your license count in groups of 5. That's kind of annoying. It'd be, I would much prefer if I could just like add it user by user. As I mentioned with Asana, also like anybody can add somebody to Asana, and now they're using up one of those licenses. So yeah, every organization or every vendor is a little bit different. And I think using your community IT, IT manager as a resource is great if you have any questions about these kinds of products.
So, do you have any last thoughts on or takeaways that you would want people to think about when they're thinking about managing their subscriptions?
One last thought I would have is make sure you have a strong offboarding process. That tends to be one place that tends to get overlooked. Often, we look at accounts and look at systems and that the client, has like a dozen staff that no longer work at the organization, and they're still paying for those licenses, and they're still, they're still kind of have what are essentially active accounts for people who are no longer there, that they no longer need.
Yeah, that's not something you like to see. And I think for security as well,
Mm-hmm.
You might have someone who left your organization in a huff and they still have access to a lot of
Mm-hmm.
the different subscriptions. So you want to keep an eye on that too. So that's a good advice. Well, thank you so much, Pat. I appreciate your time today helping us figure out how to track subscriptions and licenses. This was really helpful. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Community IT does these free webinars and podcasts for our community, and we love sharing our knowledge and experience. If you have more questions or are having trouble with your IT at your nonprofit, please get in touch with us on our website, www.communityit.com, so we can start a conversation or schedule an assessment. Downloading any of our free resources there will get you signed up for our webinar reminders, and you can attend our next webinar in real time and ask our experts your own questions. If you love podcasts, please subscribe and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits.